Hello team and welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan MSP. It's a Ukraine war news update for the 24th of March 2023. Let's get straight to it. I'm going to give you the Ukrainian release figures for the Russian losses for the day before, all the usual caveats, propaganda, inaccurate, Russia don't produce the same. I find these indicatively useful and somewhat, in fact, more and more finding them accurate, and I seek to give you evidence for these claims, supporting evidence. So what do the Ukrainians say? 1,020 liquidated personnel for the Russians. That is a whoppingly high figure. That's got back up to over 1,000. Yesterday was evidently a bad day for them. 4 tanks. So. I mean, 4 tanks is still a problematic loss if you're going to lose 4 or 5 tanks a day. But we've had days where they've been in the double figures recently. 23 armored personnel carriers, so 23 APCs. I think that includes IFVs as well. That is a huge number, massive loss. 8 artillery systems, again, a significant degradation of the artillery capacity of the Russian forces there. That figure has been one to watch every day. They've had a consistently decent number, as far as the Ukrainians are concerned, a number of artillery systems lost, the Russians. 3 anti-aircraft warfare systems. There's been, again, consistently 2 or 3 a day, 1, 2 or 3, but these are expensive pieces of kit sometimes. Not all the time. I'd say often they're expensive pieces of kit. Sometimes it might be like autocannons and things like that. But, when they are things like Bucks or S300s, those are rarer to be seen hit. But when they are these bigger bits of kit, then losing them gives you a loss of air defense in quite a wide radius. So it's not like if you lose a tank, or use 3 tanks, it's not going to really change like a 50, 100 kilometer area. If you lose one of these, suddenly you might be down on your air defense coverage in a huge area. So that's really significant. 5 drones, 2 cruise missiles. There was a little bit of activity last night for drones and cruise missiles. 12 vehicles and fuel tanks, and 4 pieces of special equipment. Again, that's another fairly high number for pieces of special equipment. I've been talking about that, trying to wonder what they are often, but it could well be things like radar systems that again feed into the air defense capability of the Russians there. That is another bad day for the Russians. And even if this is like 60% accurate in terms of liquidated personnel, that's still that's still 600 troops lost, in terms of the troops only. And that is, if it's merely 60%, there's 40% over exaggeration, then that's still massively problematic. So I think whatever way you look at these figures, that's a bad day for the Russians. Then we start hearing things like this. This is Dan Rice, who says Bakhmut is where the Russian army went to die. Now, he's a special advisor to Valery Zaluzhny, who is in charge of the kind of armed forces of Ukraine, and he's your main guy for working out what happens where, and etc. etc. And he's, I think, in an interview recently with NV, I'm not quite sure who they are, he tells how much the Russian army loses every month in killed and wounded in Ukraine. So he says, I believe that Bakhmut is a place where the Russian army went to die. He also believes that Putin continues to make blunder after blunder, violating all the principles of war. Quote, a year ago, he attacked Ukraine in the wrong month. You can't attack in these conditions in February. There's a lot of talk about this. It was just a really bad decision. But of course, if you're thinking you're going to take the country in 3 days and depose the government, then it doesn't really matter that it's February. But because he got that utterly wrong, he ended up being accidentally in a war and in the wrong month. Like if he had planned on doing a war in the first place, they wouldn't have done that in February. But it was always supposed to be a special military operation. I mean, we joke about that term, but at the beginning in February last year, it literally was a special military operation. Just go in, depose the government, clear things up over a 15-day period, job done. Have Rosgvardia in there and some Spetsnaz, people who aren't kind of military, aren't frontline army people who are designed to kind of clear up issues, fractious pushback here and there. Yep, sorted. We got the people for that. Oh no, they don't want us here. Oh no, we're in a war. Oh no, it's February. Oh no, our logistics have been screwed, and we're a railway-based army that's now having to do truck-based logistics. oh dang, and they've hit loads of our trucks and knocked out railways as well, we're in trouble. And here we are a year later. So a year ago, he attacked Ukraine in the wrong month. You can't attack in these conditions in February, but he still continued to attack this year in February and March, so now. And all he did was eat his army, attacking in open ground the infantry with infantry against artillery. They lost so many Russians. According to Rice, the Ukrainian army kills about 25,000 Russians a month today at the moment. So if you're looking at these figures that are 700 to 1,000 liquidated personnel a day in a 31-day month, that does equate to 25,000. So he's saying that these figures released by the General Staff are correct. The figures for March will be something like this, and about 75,000 losses of the Russian Federation in Ukraine for March are wounded. So this is a 1-to-3 ratio. They are 25,000 dead. So he's saying yesterday there'll be 1,000 dead and 3,000 wounded on top of that. So that's 4,000 troops taken out of activity, would be what Dan Rice is saying. And the question is he accurate? All the best units of the Russian army are being destroyed. Terrible time to attack. Therefore, when the right time for the offensive comes in the spring, Ukraine will have a much stronger army and much better provision than it was a year ago. And you have to go on the offensive to win back positions. And I believe that this spring, Ukraine will have a very powerful counteroffensive that will shock the world. Now, on the socials, that quote has been doing the rounds. Lots of people have been referring to Dan Rice saying this. He's a person in quite a position of knowledge and information. And saying things like that have made people go, "Oh, this sounds like it's going to be interesting." Now, the question is this part of the propaganda machine? How much of this is, truly going to happen and truly is happening in terms of the figures? I don't know, but I'm letting you know. You can decide how accurate you think Dan Rice is being there. Okay. Over the last 24 hours, last night, there's been quite some activity. Earlier this evening, says Tim White, last night, Ukraine's air defense in the southern region says it shot down 2 Kh-59 missiles, which Russia had fired at Odessa. Southern Command says they were launched by Su-35 fighter aircraft over the Black Sea. Okay, so there's a bit of missile activity, and you saw that reflected in the General Staff statistics just now. I find this very interesting. On the evening of March the 23rd, so this is actually, this is yesterday evening, about 10 Russian Sukhoi Su-35S fighter jets attacked targets in the Sumy region, so that's north of Ukraine, with guided aerial bombs. So this is something I don't use too often because they don't have too many guided bombs. The spokesman of the Ukrainian Air Force informed. This type of attack with such an amount of fighter jets using guided bombs was rather uncharacteristic for the Russian Air Force during this war. Curious if it signals a possible change of tactics in the future, or was it just a one-off attack? I don't know much more detail about this, what they were aiming for, how successful they were, but that is really significant, and it shows that it does show a change of tactics. This is a sort of thing, of course, we would expect Russia to be doing throughout the whole war, but they haven't been doing this. But I'd be very interested to see what the outcome of that was. Moving on to further Russian attacks. So I talked about S-300 hitting Zaporizhia, and that's residential block, ballistic trajectory coming down. I've got some kickback from a guy that I banned called Predsednik, and who I'd interacted with before. Then he became a proper troll, and so I banned him. He's come back calling himself Dragomir or something. Anyway, he's saying, how do you know that the missile attack on Zaporizhia wasn't a Ukrainian missile? It's like, because it's a ballistic missile in a trajectory of a ballistic missile aimed, it appears, or at least hitting a residential building. I'm thoroughly justified in thinking that's Russia doing that and not Ukraine. When you've had an S-300 drop out the sky, like in Poland, and there's all that controversy, and it ended up being a ballistic missile. It wasn't one that came down, I believe, in some big explosion like that. It caused some issue, but it kind of dropped out the sky type thing. This is different. This is like slamming into a residential building. Anyway, I'm justified in believing that is indeed a Russian missile. And here we've got a Russian S-300 missiles being sent at Konstantinivka, which is west of Bakhmut, in the early hours of March the 24th, killing 3 women, according to the Prosecutor General's office in Donetsk Oblast. The women were IDPs, internally displaced people, including one who had fled Bakhmut. It's terrible. Fleeing one place because war is there, going to another, and then getting hit by missiles. Horrible, horrible. But what's important about this is that the S-300 hit a point of invincibility. So these are these safe places that have been built or adapted so that they are a place of refuge for such attacks. And this place was blown up by an S-300. So that's a real shame there. In the morning as well, the Russians covered Belozorok, and I don't know where this is. I don't know if that's Belarusk, Belozerka, could be a number of places. It might be in the Kherson region, not really sure. With massive artillery fire, says the regional military administration. 1 dead, 4 injured. Quote, there's not a single military facility nearby. The military of the Russian Federation targeted the homes of civilians in the region, and this was at a time when people were still sleeping in their homes, said the regional military administration. I don't know which region that is. It's a bit annoying that I don't have the details of that, but again, we've got civilian infrastructure being hit. The question is how much of this, there's always going to be the pushback from Russians that this is propaganda, that actually they have hit military targets, or that these are being shot down from trying to hit military targets and end up hitting civilian targets, and so on and so forth. There are counter narratives always. HIMARS, Russian soldiers, shows how their command base was destroyed by HIMARS. The reason I'm showing this is because actually I've not seen a lot of news about HIMARS recently, though I'm absolutely certain they are consistently active. You can see the destructive power of them, taking out entire buildings, and if that's an accumulation of troops, then of course that's going to be quite a problem for the Russians. But there you can see that's someone claiming HIMARS activity there. He's unhappy about that base being destroyed. Now, this I'm including this because I think it's quite interesting that I've talked about how the Ukrainians, I think, have been targeting air defense systems and artillery systems quite purposefully, in a systematic way, and this could be in advance of a counteroffensive, needing to clear the air and clear the airspace from defenses, but also clear areas of artillery, because they are the biggest killer of Ukrainian troops. But also, if you're going to do a counteroffensive, you want to take out the artillery before you do that. So that some of these figures that we've been seeing a huge uptick, or a significant uptick, in artillery pieces taken out. And then things like electronic warfare as well. So here's a tower that was targeted purposefully by the Ukrainians, and we can see what's interesting here is an airburst round hits above that building to take the building out. I presume they intended to take the building out, but I'm not sure whether this was aimed at the mast itself, but I don't know. It appears to be an airburst because it exploded up here, and then the airburst then sends out lots of other stuff below. So they're quite useful against troops. Airburst. I don't know. I don't know what the rationale is for using that kind of munition against that building, but as you can see, there's not much of the building left there. And then the precision hit on the top of the mast is pretty effective. You can see all those bits of electronic warfare gadgetry at the top, and they'll be taken out. And then I think, oh, shut up. And then something else goes on over there. Not quite sure what that arrow is pointed to. I think it might be movement of something. I don't know. Yeah, people running away from that installation. Anyway, I just thought it was important to show the range of things that are being hit, including this. So this is a Russian IL-220 Zoopark 2 reconnaissance and fire control radar system. So this basically alerts the Russian artillery or whatnot to targets, Ukrainian artillery eventually got this expensive target somewhere in the Donetsk Oblast. So this apparently had been moving around quite a bit. Shut up. Have been moving around quite a bit, and they eventually locked onto it and took it out. And this is a high value target. This will be one of those bits of special equipment that's listed at the end of the general staff list of losses. And there you go. So that's apparently that bit of kit on fire. This is one of those things that sends up those kind of radar masts once it's set up, and all those kind of bits of radar telemetry and gadgetry, but that's been taken out. Russia on fire. The building of the research and production complex caught fire in the city of Aramil, Russia. Fire broke out over an area of 4,000 square meters. The complex develops various protective coatings, including those for military purposes. So this is burning, and it's quite a significant fire burning in Russia. Again, this is we do see this on a daily basis. Here's just another example, and that is a consistent, as I always say, thorn in the side of the Russians. They're trying to fight a war abroad, and yet at home they seem to be having issues with quite devastating fires. Latest defense intelligence update from the UK Defense Intelligence says, as of mid-March 2023, Russia had likely redeployed at least 1,000 troops who had been training at the Oberst-Lesnovsky training ground in southwestern Belarus. Although no new rotation of troops has been noted, Russia has highly likely left the tentative camp in place, suggesting it is considering continuing the training program. The fact Russia has resorted to training its personnel under the much less experienced Belarusian army highlights how Russia's special military operation has severely dislocated the Russian military's training system. Instructors have largely been deployed in Ukraine. Russia likely also views Belarus's continued indirect support of the operation as important political messaging. So basically, they've sent their own trainers onto the front line, the Russians, and they don't really have the training capacity anymore, or capability. So they don't have enough of them. They don't have the ability to do that. So they send their troops to Belarus in order to get the training, even though the Belarusian training is less effective. And they're keeping that in place. So they've rotated troops out there, but they haven't rotated any more in. I presume they'd have to wait for either conscription or a mobilization to get new troops into there. And meanwhile, it's a way of saying, yeah, Belarus are on our side, and it's a bit of political posturing. Right, let's go to talk a little bit about Prigozhin. Prigozhin is reportedly preparing to scale back his army's operations in Ukraine after being barred from recruiting from prisons and deprived of supplies of Russian military chiefs. So I think the idea is he might go back to doing his stuff in Africa. At the end of the day, I don't think if you're looking at what Prigozhin does, and you look at the fancy new HQ he's built in Russia, which is incredibly expensive and looks rather swish, it's all about money, right? I don't know that the conflict in Ukraine is a really big money spinner. There's all the talk about Bakhmut being what he wants because of the Solidar salt mines, gypsum, and so on. And then you've got other mines around Ukraine that could be of interest to him. But he's losing an awful lot of troops. There'll be some kind of payout that he's probably having to make. I don't know with the convicts what goes on there. But he's probably looking at saying this is not really doing the PR any good, and it's not doing the finances any good. So we need to get back to what we do best, which is going around Africa, helping out with diamond mines and so on and so forth. So we might see less focus on Russia, which will be on Ukraine, which would be good for the Ukrainians. Now, Prigozhin himself, in one of his kind of interview things he does, claims that he knows about the Ukrainian plan to deal 3 blows and liberate the territory to the 1991 borders. He states that Ukraine concentrated 200,000 reserves in the Donbass, with 80,000 of them being near Bakhmut. Plans include invading the Belgorod region to use in exchange, then cutting the L or DPR in two, and finally liberating Crimea. So really quickly, let's boss through what he says. The ground is dry and the wind is blowing. Temperature is 15 to 18 degrees. He says, if I can get to the next part, what he says, So sorry about that. So what's the enemy doing? Spring is coming. Temperatures that. So everything is favourable to allow driving heavy vehicles in the fields. Um, Armoured vehicles, tanks, leopards that everyone is discussing. They prepared reserves, we'll clarify later, of about 200,000 people, 200,000 reserves. What the Ukrainians are going to do, Ukrainians will concentrate them in various places. They'll have several objectives they'll be reaching. Going from north to south, the strike, they're likely to try to deal. They'll try to go to the territory of Belgorod for it to become a good exchange benefit. So he thinks that the Ukrainians will actually go into Russia. I don't know if this is scare tactics um, to put pressure on the Russian Federation. So the border between Belgorod and Kharkiv must be reinforced as much as possible. I'll come back to that in a second. And it must be practically impregnable. I hope that's the case. Secondly, north to south, they'll definitely try to break the Svatovo-Kremenna line to reach Valuki. Third, they'll concentrate on Bakhmut. More in detail on Bakhmut now, in order to strike the Russian formations and in a certain way demoralize the forces and have a good advantage, and also not allow what's being strategically absolutely correctly planned by the Ministry of Defense, which is after attacking Bakhmut, open an operational space. If you look at the map, this is a contact line with a maximum concentration of hostilities being in Bakhmut, and this is a deep operational space, endless fields until the Dnieper, and actually until Europe. Yeah, you hear Russian voices say this. Once Bakhmut falls, then it'll be marching on to the Dnieper River and then to Kiev. And it's like, nah, it ain't going to happen. If you're a migrating bird, you can fly to Paris and poop on the Eiffel Tower. Wonderful, Prigozhin. Don't know what you say. But as of today, the enemy concentrated a group of 80,000 plus. This group around Bakhmut is in Seversk, Sloviansk, Kramatorsk, Druzhkivka, Konstantinivka, and Chaziv Yar. This sort of ring is an element of the Donbass ring, followed by constant fields. So the main objective of Ukrainians is to hold these lines. While holding these lines, they have a pretty good maneuverability here. They can go further. They can try to pick up Wagner PMC units, which I already spoke about a month ago. Wagner units envelop the AFU group in Bakhmut, putting pressure on it. While the task of the AFU is to envelop Wagner, as soon as they cut out Wagner from this sort of piece, then they'll open a hole of about 30 to 40 kilometers where they can infiltrate, concentrate, and a third of strikes they'll try to do. They'll go in several directions simultaneously. From the bottom, they'll go on to Lysychansk, Serodonetsk, trying to cut LPR or the DPR into two parts. This is the direction of the first strike. This is the direction of the second strike. This is direction of the group for the third strike. So if you can see here, north into Belgorod, into Russia. So this is north, this is south. Then towards Starobilsk through the Svatovo-Kremenna line. And then envelop Bakhmut. So not really concentrating on Zaporizhia. I'm like, no, they're going to be concentrating on Zaporizhia to go and get Crimea. That would be, so I disagree with him here. Next, they'll certainly try concentrating on in Dnipro, reach Zaporizhia direction and deal several strikes near Zaporizhia. In order to reach Berdyansk, Melitopol, and Mariupol, thus blocking Crimea. This is an old map with the border along Crimea. They'll block Crimea and then they'll most likely try to deal with the Crimea Bridge, so on and so forth, and thus push the situation to the borders of 1991. So personally, I think he's got that in the wrong order. I think they'll initially try this down in Zaporizhia first, but we shall see. That's what he thinks that the Ukrainians are doing. Right. That then preps you up to understand what's going on here, which is Russia's Kursk region. Yes, it's not Belgorod, but it's nearby. Is to spend 3.2 billion rubles, which is $42 million, on building border fortifications by the 5th of June this year, equivalent to a third of its annual health budget and more than its spend on housing and utilities. In other words, if they're going to spend that much money on defending the border, then they must be worried that the Ukrainians would genuinely have a genuine possibility of attacking across that border, which then fits into what he's saying concerning Belgorod. So is that good use of their money? Almost certainly not. I don't think Ukraine will be thinking about that at all. Right, military aid and whatnot. Slovakia has handed over 4 MiG jets already, and they plan to give Ukraine 13 MiG-29s. Well, these are the MiG, and this must be exciting. If you're Ukrainian, you must be bloody music. Excited about seeing this, which is Ukrainian fighters in MiG jets taking off from Slovakia and flying to Ukraine. I mean, this must be quite a watershed moment for the Ukrainians. Now, how the MiGs are going to be used, most people seem to indicate that they'll be used kind of behind the line. These aren't frontline jets. They've got better jets than these to use. So these will do stuff behind the lines, and that will allow those jets being used behind the lines to then be used on the front lines type thing. So it's kind of backfilling in a sort of way. These jets will pick up some of the tasks that can be done by jets like by these, if you see what I mean, freeing up jets that were previously doing those tasks. Right. Ukraine aims for trilateral talks with Finland and the US regarding FA-18 Hornet fighter jets. So there's been this talk about these fighter jets being requested from Ukraine, from Finland by Ukraine. This is now the request has formally been sent, and an official request to Finland for the supply of those fighters for the Air Force. The first step would be trilateral talks between Finland, the US, and Ukraine. So that looks to be taking place, or at least Ukraine have started to put the pieces of the jigsaw in place for that to happen. Whether it will, I don't know. Spain to send its first 6 Leopard 2 tanks to Ukraine by the end of next week. And that's from Spanish Defense Ministry. So that's really good news. At the same time, Finland has decided to double the number of Leopard 2 armored mine clearing vehicles it will send from 3 to 6. Mine clearing vehicles are vital for the initial phase of the counteroffensives. And I talked about that last week. Ukraine is ready for a major spring, is getting ready for a major spring offensive. So you're starting to see more of these ARVs and AEVs, armored recovery vehicles, to be able to recover tanks, and armored engineering vehicles, bridge layers, mine clearers, all this kind of stuff. I think they've kind of realized that they need more and more and more of these things, and they're putting the feelers out, and countries like Finland are coming up with the goods to get that sort of the capacity of the Ukrainian forces to do these kind of activities, to get that up to what it needs to be. And that's part of a 161 million euro Finnish Ministry of Defense assistance package. So that's fantastic. The Swiss-made armored vehicles spotted on the battlefield in the Donbass region. So this is an Eagle One. I've seen another video of this. It looks like quite a cool bit of kit, actually, the Eagle One. People are kind of wondering how that's ended up on the front line, considering Swiss neutrality. But it's there. So interesting. I wonder how that's ended up there. A nice initiative and a great gift. The Czech initiative gift for Putin collected 30 million crowns, which is 1.2 million euros, for the purchase of an RM-70, that's called a Vampire, multiple launch rocket system for Ukraine. The transfer is planned in the coming weeks. So there are so many ways that military equipment is getting to Ukraine. You're having independent third-party entities that are raising money and doing it. You've got ministries of defense in different countries doing it. Centralized government, you've got the EU, so on and so forth. There's lots of different ways of getting kit there, but here we've got an MLRS. It appears to be being sent by an independent entity. Fantastic. One of these was taken out recently. I showed you video footage of that being taken out, but yeah, that'll help the Ukrainians. And here we have a whole bunch of MRAPs, mine resistant ambush protection vehicles, on the side of a highway getting ready for something. And this is, I believe, in Ukraine. Fantastic for the Ukrainians. Now, I've mentioned these before. These are Australian disposable cardboard drones.
What I'm excited about is I think it provides
a high-tech weapon made with low-tech components, waxed cardboard and rubber bands, but with military-grade guidance systems.
And what I'm excited about is I think it provides the warfighter the opportunity to innovate in the battle space.
The cardboard drone launched by hand or catapult. 100 a month are being sent to Ukrainian soldiers, arriving as flat packs.
And then you assemble it as if it's from IKEA, and then you can use it. It's cheap, it's very important because you can use it and it's expendable.
Used for supply and medicine drops, as a decoy and for lethal missions.
I know it's been used for that.
So that's great. So there's a whole range of applications for these drones, and they're cheap. They're made of cardboard, etc., etc. Fantastic. Really good to see these being used. And as this tweet says, 100 delivered every month, as you just heard. The drone can lift 3 to 5 kilograms, carry cargo for 1 to 3 hours, and has a flight range of 40 to 120 kilometers. Fantastic, and there are lots of people have been singing the praise of this kind of provision there. Really good. On the other hand, you've also got Ukraine starting to ramp up production of indigenous production for, in this case, drones. This is a Shark drone that's, I believe, a bit of an answer to the Orlan 10, Orlan 30 drone that the Russians have been able to use very effectively, that have a really decent range. This has a range of 60 to 70 kilometers and a flight duration of 4 hours, and mainly provide reconnaissance and assistance to artillery units. In total, Ukraine will receive 25 of these complexes, which is 75 UAVs in total. So that's the first batch of newly designed Shark drones. They have been on the front line, but probably in their kind of testing phase. So it's really great that they are starting to make these in greater numbers. That obviously needs to be ramped up to proper industrial numbers going forward. And sorry, this is what I should have shown earlier. That's Finland Leopard 2 mine clearing vehicle. So let's go back to where I was. Yeah, an American instructor watches Ukrainian soldiers deploy a big radar in the field. Our military deploys a Patriot battery in 40 to 45 minutes. He said, Ukrainians manage it in 25. They do a great job. So this is the idea that not only have Ukrainians gone through the Patriot training schedule much quicker than expected, and in fact, they're getting a Patriot imminently, which is, one of the best systems in the world, but they're also doing a really good job of being trained on that, and they're being very effective at using that, certainly in a training environment. The EU summit has supported the joint purchase of ammunition for Ukraine. Okay, we know this, so they're getting together to get artillery shell production upscaled and to work together to, when you work as a block, it's much more effective. But the interesting part here is not just that, it's also for the transfer of missiles. So European Council welcomes the agreement reached in the Council on the urgent supply of surface-to-surface ammunition and artillery ammunition to Ukraine, as well as, if necessary, missiles. Be very interesting to see what missiles. Now, obviously, they're going to need MLRS missiles. They're going to need HIMARS missiles, but whether that will include any longer range missiles, I don't know. The EU made a statement about a new package of sanctions against Russia. So they previously talked about how they've kind of exhausted all the sanctions, about how there's not much further you can go, but they are kind of squeezing out some more. This was reported by the correspondent for Radio Liberty. According to journalists, the relevant information was published by Ursula von der Leyen, and it will deal with predominantly the circumvention of sanctions. So that she spoke about the 11th package of EU sanctions against the Russian Federation, which will mainly deal with the fight against bypassing already introduced restrictive measures. So it's like they can't introduce many more new measures, but it's about stopping the Russians getting around the existing measures. So that's really good news for Ukrainians. And again, this is in the wrong place. Sorry, the Patriot here, 3,900 Ukrainian soldiers have undergone. Oh no, this isn't about Patriot. Have undergone training in Germany to form 3 Bradley infantry fighting vehicle mechanized battalions, 3 striker battalions, 2 self-propelled artillery battalions, and a brigade staff. This is what it's talking about yesterday with regard to combined arms maneuvers. It's not just about training your troops in like running into a trench, shooting at the opposition. Right, you know how to shoot a gun. You've done that training. Right, jog on, mate. You've been trained. It's like, okay, now you've been trained in your basic stuff of firing and doing a bit of first aid and all that. Now we're going to get all of you guys together. You guys have been training on the Bradleys. You guys have been training on the SPGs, self-propelled guns. You guys are infantry. Right, you're going to do this whole maneuver together, and we're going to do this on a massive set of fields or some massive area in Germany, and we're going to do combined arms initiatives, because that's what you're actually going to be doing on the battlefield. Yes, you need the basic training, but just as importantly, you need these combined training. So now on to geopolitics, just for the last bit of my news update. So we'll go to first here. The war in Ukraine left Moscow unable to deliver vital defense supplies it committed to India's military. I mentioned this before, which is Russia were the second biggest arms exporters in the world after the US, France third. You've had people like South Korea marching up the leaderboard. They were in eighth. I'm sure you're going to see them in the top five this by the end of this year. Now, I'm really interested to see where Russia ends up in the 2022 figures, last year's figures, because I'm sure they would have dropped out of the top five, possibly even the top 10. I can't think that they would have meaningfully exported any equipment last year. Certainly not vast amounts, because we know that they've ended up using it themselves. Now, India has now said that the Indian Air Force representative told the committee that Russia had planned a major delivery this year that would not take place. Now, we know that some of the export tanks that we believe were supposed to be exported to India, or were India's tanks that they sent back to be adapted and upgraded, end up being sent to the front line. So India must be pretty annoyed about this. Now, do you think that they're going to be really patient and just hang on for Russia to be able to get their manufacturing back online in 3 to 5 years' time, or whatever it'll be? No, they'll be going to someone else. So who's it going to be? It's going to be a direct competitor to the Russia's defense industrial military complex. So it's going to be the US, it's going to be South Korea, it's going to be China, it's going to be all these other manufacturers that are going to be chomping at the bit to replace Russia's deals with India in this case. So Russia are going to be losing out big time in the international defense marketplace. Okay, there it is. The Finnish president has historically signed off to NATO. Now we wait. We're expecting good news from Budapest and Ankara. So that's Hungary and Turkey. So it looks like Finland will be good to go for joining NATO. Sweden's a bit more difficult because they had that Quran burning incident that seemed to be financed by Russia. But anyway, that annoyed Turkey, and they're on a bit of a hold with that one. But Finland seemed to have the go-ahead, I think, as far as Ankara are concerned. It's going to be about Orban and Hungary. Well, Hungary. Other news. Hungarian official says Budapest will not arrest Putin if he visits. So this is kind of the positioning of Hungary, and they are really annoying an awful lot of people who are pro-Ukrainian. Despite the International Criminal Court's arrest warrant, Hungary would not detain Russian dictator Vladimir Putin if he entered the country. Prime Minister Viktor Orban's chief of staff has said. Right, this is so worth listening to. And do I have time? Probably not. This is worth listening to in Italian with the subtitles. So if you are watching this, that's fine. If you're listening to this, stop just listening. Watch this so you can understand what she's saying. This is absolutely brilliant. This is Meloni, who is quite a staunch right winger, and there's been this worry because she's in coalition with a bunch of parties who are much more pro-Russian. And there's been this worry that Italy are going to side with Russia in this conflict. But Meloni's come out and she's been completely pro-Ukrainian, like in a massive way. And that's going to have been annoying her, the other two parties in the coalition that make up this right-wing coalition in Italy. She's been absolutely magnificent on Ukraine. I don't know about any other domestic policies that are going on in Italy. But here, anyway, listen to this. And listen to this because of how emotional she gets here. So this means a lot to her. This is really, really good news.
Faccio ai colleghi del Movimento 5 Stelle riguardo al tema dell'Ucraina. L'onorevole Scutellacci dice fermatevi. Penso che lo debba dire a Putin, onorevole. E mi fa specie che lo dica a noi perché probabilmente questo tradisce una posizione. Cioè vuol dire consentire l'invasione dell'Ucraina. Perché se noi ci fermiamo, noi consentiamo, adesso le cose vanno chiamate con il loro nome, se noi ci fermiamo, noi consentiamo l'invasione dell'Ucraina. Ora io non sono così ipocrita da scambiare una invasione con la parola pace. E quindi credo che non si debba consentire l'invasione dell'Ucraina, che non vuol dire non lavorare per un piano di pace o che non lavorare per una soluzione del conflitto. Ma pensate davvero che a qualcuno piaccia la guerra? Pensate che qualcuno davvero si diverta a stare in questo quadro? No. Ma chiaramente la situazione è un tantino più complessa di come la fa certa propaganda, perché si parla di pace, perfetto. Mi si può dire quali sono secondo voi le condizioni per aprire un tavolo di trattative? Concretamente, scendiamo nel tema della pace, perché è un tema che a me appassiona, l'ho già detto in quest'Aula, lo ribadisco. Cioè, voi ritenete ad esempio che per aprire un qualsiasi tavolo di trattativa si debba o non si debba a monte chiedere alla Russia di cessare le ostilità e ritirare le truppe dal territorio ucraino? Ritenete che si debbano rivedere i confini dell'Ucraina e come? Ritenete che si debbano dare a Mosca i territori che ha occupato e su quali ha celebrato un referendum di autodeterminazione o no? Questo è quello che vorrei sentire se stiamo parlando seriamente di pace, altrimenti quello che si sta facendo è la propaganda sulla pelle di una nazione sovrana, di un popolo libero e del diritto internazionale, e questo è irresponsabile. Grazie.
Absolutely brilliant. Like, I could listen to that all day. Like the emotion, obviously, you know, Italians can get like that, and the language is very, there's a great deal of intonation always with Italian, but my goodness, you can tell what she really believes from that. And that is, you know, don't follow this propaganda line. Peace is getting the Russians out of Ukraine. Peace is the Russians withdrawing. Like, that's when you go to the negotiation table. Absolutely bloody brilliant. That's really, really good speech. And that gives me really great hope going forward that there will be nations that will continue to support Ukraine in this way. And I thought it was really important to play that whole thing. And I hope you stopped and watched it. And if you didn't, go back and watch what she actually says in terms of subtitles. And last thing, Kazakhstan from the 1st of April will block goods that go to Russia as part of the Parallel Impulse Euro-Asia net report, Eurasia net report. So Kazakhstan is poised to intensify vetting of re-exports to Russia. Kazakhstan does not apply sanctions and restrictions in trade with Russia at the moment, but at the same time, the authorities of Kazakhstan noted that the country will not become a platform for circumventing Western sanctions. So it is playing quite an interesting game here, Kazakhstan, where it's siding more with Western nations than with its neighboring Russia. Hugely important, because actually one way that Russia is able to circumvent these sanctions is through places like Kazakhstan and a lot of these Eurasian nations called South Caucasus and so on. Anyway, that's the news update for today. Sorry, it's another long one. I promised it'd be shorter and I failed. Oh, I'm a liar. Sorry. I'm not really. I'm trying to provide you with as much information as I think you need and as I'm interested in myself. And I hope you appreciate it. Anyway, please like, subscribe and share. Thank you so much for supporting the channel. I really am grateful for that. Take care and I'll speak to you later.